Well, hey, good evening and welcome to Virtual Vintage. My name is Austin.
And I'm Sam.
And tonight, just like every Tuesday, we are here with Virtual Vintage. Now, Vintage is the ministry for 18 to 25-year-olds here at the chapel. And we believe in giving everyone every opportunity to hear and experience the love of Jesus Christ in our life. And tonight's no different. Tonight, we're going to bring you a night full of joy, full of hope, and full of faith. But Sam, it's going to be a great evening tonight.
Yes, it is. Did you enjoy this weekend? Super sunny?
I did. Saturday was literally, it felt like spring, actually, for once, which is weird. I know we've had all this cold weather and things, but it was like super warm. I was able to get outside. What did you do this weekend? Was it fun?
I was outside too, soaking in the sun, got a little sunburnt.
Yeah, that's okay. You know, we all get sunburned from here time and again, but I'd love to see, we have some chats up. If you guys are joining us on YouTube or on Facebook, why don't you just message us in the chat, where you're watching from or how you used this past weekend, which was so beautiful to be able to go out and have some fun. Let us know what you did. We'd love to hear from you. But a couple things we want to make you aware of. So YouTube, we have the YouTube channel.
Yep, subscribe.
If you're there, hit the notification bell. We'd love for you to subscribe. And next week, Sam, Vintage is going to look a little bit different.
Why
don't you tell us a little bit about it?
We're going to have Vintage with Jay on Tuesday in his home. So it'll look a little different. We'll stream on Instagram, so make sure you give us a follow there at vintage_truth. And we'll just have some devotional time with Jay on Tuesday because next week looks a little different. On Wednesday, we have the Night of Encouragement. We'll be there. You'll be there, right? Yeah, and it'll just be a great night, so make sure you tune in on that Wednesday at 7.
Yep. Next Wednesday, 7 o'clock, Night of Encouragement. So that's going to be a family-friendly, all church. We're all going to go all in, chapel family, all together, one night, virtually together. Never been done before. It's going to be really cool. It's going to be 7 p.m. At thechapel.com. You'll be able to join us for all of those things. But some of you have been messaging in and letting us know where you're watching from or what you've been doing this past weekend. We got Maria's hanging out with us from Washington, D.C. We got some people in Lockport. Jay and I were in Lockport today. We went to Steamworks.
Nice.
So support your local businesses. Grab yourself some Steamworks, or if you're in Clarence, Goodrich Coffee, or any of the places. They're always still trying to find some good coffee around here. But we got people from DC and Lewiston. I went to Orange Cat on Saturday. I love coffee. I went with my girlfriend to the Gorge.
Nice.
We went hiking. So Corey and I went hiking at the Gorge. So that was cool. I know that's in your neck of the woods, the Niagara Falls region.
Yeah.
So. Cool. Some of you are hanging out at Alfred. Sam, did you know I used to live in Wellsville?
No way.
I used to live in Wellsville. I used to play.
I've never even heard of that
I played
place.
intramural basketball at Alfred. So all of you Alfred friends, I snuck in and signed up for intramurals. And I don't know if that's illegal or not, but for a couple years I was at Alfred playing some intramurals basketball. Not that I'm a good ball player or not. Jay schools me all the time. Isn't that right, Jay? That's right. That's right. Hey, Mindy, you went to Devil's Hole. I was there too.
Yes.
We probably passed each other.
Hiking.
Wow. Pretty cool. What else we got? So we got Amherst. We got Syracuse, New York. You ever been to Syracuse?
Yeah, I have. Actually went to the mall there for some fun.
Yep, the American Mall.
Yes.
That's there. Cool. Well, can we catch up with Daryl and just see? Daryl, what'd you do this weekend? You over there?
Trying to enjoy the great outdoors. I was biking a little bit. Took a pretty long bike ride, so that was fun.
Wow.
Nice.
Daryl loves his bike. He always tells me about it. So cool.
Always
Some of you are letting us know what else you've been doing. Devil's Hole, Alfred. A lot of Alfred friends. They're our faithful.
Someone had a picnic at Ted's, it said. That's fun. Outside, in the parking lot.
I've not had a Ted's this year.
I didn't know they were open.
Summer is coming. So, good deal. So, but we're going to get started in just a few moments. So Jay's going to be sharing a word with us tonight from the Bible and just letting us know how God is moving in our life. So we're grateful that you join us every single week. This is something that we can come together. Although we can't meet physically, this is a way that we can continue to connect. So if you're not in a community group or a group of people that meet after this, we would love for you to DM us on Instagram. That's vintage_truth. Would you message us? We'd love to connect with you in some way. Let us know who you are, where you're from, what you've been doing, and how we can best support you and help you in this season. But we're going to hear from Jay in just a few minutes. But before we do, I want to send it over to Daryl as he shares a story of hope with us tonight.
Thanks, Austin. Yeah, we want to really highlight hope, especially in this season that we're all going through. There are some great stories out there, and we just want as you guys maybe are diving into groups with your community group, or just you as you're watching. We want to hear your stories of hope and how you're getting through this season with different things maybe that you're reading or that God's teaching you, or different ways that you're walking through it. If you can shoot us an email, vintage@thechapel.com, or DM us at vintage_truth in Instagram, that'd be fantastic. We would love just to hear your stories, and we would love to feature them here on a Tuesday night at Vintage so that you guys can all just be a part and share in the joy and the hope that, that you're experiencing throughout this time. So we have one of our community group leaders. His name is Josh, and he's going to be sharing a story of hope as he was reading through some scriptures, and just his story of how that touched his life and the hope that that brought him. So we just want to hear from Josh, so here's Josh.
Hey Vintage, what's going on? My name is Josh, and I'm a small group leader here. I wanted to kick tonight off with some scripture, so please join me in Psalm 73, which is called God is my strength and my portion forever. Truly God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For they have no pangs until death. Their bodies are fat and sleek. They're not in trouble as others are. They're not stricken like the rest of mankind. Therefore pride is their necklace. Violence covers them as a garment. Their eyes swell out through fatness. Their hearts overflow with follies. They scoff and speak with malice. Lawfully they threaten oppression. They set their mouths against the heavens, and their tongue struts through the earth. Therefore his people turn back to them and find no fault in them. And they say, how can God know? Is there knowledge in the Most High? Behold, these are the wicked. Always at ease they increase in riches. All in vain have I kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence. For all the day long I have been stricken and rebuked every morning. If I had said, I will speak thus, I would have betrayed the generation of your children. But when I thought how to understand this, it seemed to me a wearisome task, until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I discerned their end. Truly you set them in slippery places. You make them fall to ruin. How they are destroyed in a moment, swept away utterly by terrors. Like a dream when one awakes, O Lord, when you rouse yourself, you despise them as phantoms. When my soul was embittered, when I was pricked in heart, I was brutish and ignorant. I was like a beast toward you. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel. And afterward, you will receive me to glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion, and to everyone who is unfaithful to you. But for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the Lord my refuge, that I may tell all of your works. So I just think this is a really interesting psalm, and a problem that probably a lot of us, or a question that a lot of us grapple with. This is an Israelite who is trying to live the way of God, the way that he's called to. And yet he's having a hard time with it because he's looking around his community and he's seeing people who frankly are not, right? He says that they're violent, they're arrogant, they're malicious, they're oppressive. And yet they seem to be doing pretty well. He says they're prosperous, they're well-fed. They don't have to go through as much trouble as he goes through in his life. And so that's causing some doubt for him. And he has to ask himself, is this in vain? Or basically, am I wasting my time trying to live this way? And this all flips around then when he discerns it and just he says, I discerned their end. And he realizes that yes, they definitely have some earthly success and they have a pretty good life while they're here. But it's destroyed in an instant. It's destroyed upon death, and it's not eternal. And so there is not strength in that lifestyle apart from God, because it can end in an instant, and it ends when God wants it to end. And so he says, you know what? They can have the earthly success. They can have all the possessions and the easy lifestyle that they have now. Because he says, there is nothing on earth that I desire, God, besides you. And so he says, you know what? God is my strength, because I know that is eternal. That is so much more than what is on earth, and that's not going away. And so I just think it's an awesome reflection on a question that still exists to this day. And I really appreciated reading it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the night.
Thank you so much, Josh. And that was just a great passage and just a way to remember that we need to keep our eyes focused on Christ through this time. And we just need to keep our hope in him, not to look around and get, weighed down by what's going on in this world or different things that we're seeing, but just to keep our eyes focused and know that he is greater and his plan is for us and what we want to just strive for each and every day. So keep in the word, keep reading, and any of those stories from hope, like I said, we want to hear your stories. We want to keep the hope alive, especially in this time. So we're so thankful for that message. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to open up this time in prayer right before we send it over to Pastor Jay. So Melissa?
Thank you so much, Lord, that we are able to come together, Lord, and in the midst of these times, Lord, that we are able to hear the word and come together as one Vintage community. And I just lift up, Lord, everybody who's tuning in tonight. God, I thank you, Lord, that you know each of our hearts specifically. God, you know us so uniquely, so intimately. And God, I just pray, Lord, for all those who are listening, God, for our Vintage community and for those who are tuning in tonight, maybe even for the first time, God, that we would all, know in a deeper way, God, of how much you know us, how much you love us, and how you have a plan for our lives. And God, that you have ordained us to be alive during this time in history. So God, I pray, Lord, that you would give us open ears, open hearts to receive what you have to say to us tonight. And God, that your will be done in our hearts and our lives and in everything that we do. And Jesus, we love you and we pray these things in your name. Amen.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you for tuning in tonight to Virtual Vintage. Whether you consider yourself a person of the Vintage community, or maybe you just stumbled upon us tonight through Facebook or our YouTube channel or on Instagram or something like that, thank you. My name is Jay, and we gather here together every Tuesday night so that we can find faith, hope, and joy in Jesus. And that's what Tuesday nights are all about. And so I'm praying that God speaks to you in a personal way. So I've, in this time, I've been listening to some podcasts, some leadership podcasts, and learning about this idea of leadership in crisis or crisis leadership. Because this pandemic is viewed as a crisis. And so how should leaders respond? And so I've been looking to learn from that and how I can grow in my leadership. And that just reminded me of a passage in James chapter 1. And we're not hanging out in this particular passage tonight, but James is writing, and he's writing to the 12 tribes that are scattered among the nations. And I don't know about you, but that has extra meaning to me in this season, this idea of tribes being scattered or God's people being scattered. The church can't gather together physically. Vintage can't gather together physically. And so even though we can connect in this way, and we're grateful for it, at times we do kind of feel scattered, do we not? There's certain family members we might not be able to see, certain people in our life that we're not interacting with or can't come in close contact with as a result of what's going on. But he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith does something. It produces perseverance. And then let your perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. And so when we talk about this idea of crisis, crisis kind of does some things. It reveals our character. And then it also refines our character. So crisis happens, and then your character, my character, it quickly gets put on display, does it not? How you and I respond, and maybe we respond because fear is reigning in our lives, or we're nervous, or we're anxious, or we're scared. But also crisis, what it does is it refines our character, that perseverance, when it does its work in our lives, that we lack nothing and we become mature and complete. And here's the thing, this isn't just about you and I becoming the best version of ourselves, as the scriptures say, but allowing God through Jesus to transform us. And so crisis turns us into more like Christ. And so I'm learning some of these principles, and then it just kind of led me to this thought that crisis kind of upends our plans, does it not? I don't know about you, but I had some plans this spring. I had some plans personally. I was going to travel to a few places, and those got canceled. I had some plans for Vintage. We were setting up our Raise campaign where we were raising money and awareness to fight trafficking in Cambodia, working with AIM. And I had gone to Cambodia in November and for the first time, and it was that much more meaningful. And in the back of my mind, I was like, what does that mean for our campaign heading this spring? We're gonna do 8 weeks. And I had been there and I had this experience. And so I had these thoughts and this plan and these plans for our AIM campaign, our Raise campaign. I had plans for a worship night where we were gonna offer up baptisms, believer baptisms. So we're gonna have a baptism night in a week or two at Vintage, and that's not happening. See, crisis upends plans, and that got me and reminded me of one of my best friends and one of my former roommates, a guy by the name of Ray, who I met at Circle C Ranch. And I met him after this crisis had happened in his life. But one of my best friends, Ray, he was 18, 19 years old, and he had some plans. He was pretty successful at his job, but he was planning on maybe going back to school because he was thinking maybe he wanted to do something else, and he wasn't quite sure. But while he was working, he was doing really well, but he started getting headaches, and the headaches started to get worse, and they started to last longer, and he wasn't sure exactly what was going on, and he hoped maybe that it would pass, but one day he went to sleep, and he fell asleep in the afternoon, maybe around 2 p.m., and he slept for like 15 hours straight. And it was then that his parents were like, hey, we need to get you to the doctor. You see, Ray had a tumor in his head. He had a tumor in his brain, and he had to go for emergency surgery, and it was cancer, and he had to get treatment, and his plans were upended. That was not Ray's plan for his life. Now, I met him shortly after that when he was getting ready to enter college at Brockport to be a phys ed teacher, which is interesting because that was his plan there, but he was a phys ed teacher for some time at a charter school, but that led him into another program, and now Ray is a nurse, and he's part of the essential workforce that is helping people in this time. And Ray most certainly was always an inspiration to me. Not only was he a close friend, but he was someone I looked up to. And when I started working at Circle C, I just viewed him as someone who was further along or more mature than me. And God has most certainly used him in my life. But I'm not sure how you're feeling about plans right now. Maybe you had some plans for your 2020, and that's not working out so well. But I do want to look at a passage in James tonight with this idea of plans and is God really in control? What does God's control kind of look like? And how should you and I live in the light of that? And so we're going to find ourselves in James chapter 4 tonight, verses 13 through 17. And James writes this: "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them." Interesting passage from James, who just so happens to be the little brother of Jesus. But he's talking to people, and he's not talking to people who have given up on plans. that are just simply sitting on their couch, crushing a bag of Doritos and binging Netflix. He is talking to people who have plans for their life, right? He's talking to people who will go to this city or that, so people who have plans to go out and do something, that maybe even want to spend a year doing something, that people that want to carry on business, that want to make money or make a profit or make a living. That's who he's talking to. Now, is the idea of this passage, is James trying to get at that if you and I have plans that we are evil or arrogant or boastful, because that's what he says, all as it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes, all such boasting is evil. Is he saying that you and I shouldn't have a plan for our lives, that you and I shouldn't have aspirations like, hey, I want to get into this program, or I want to graduate with this degree, or I want to step into this career, or I want to pivot from this career to that career? Should you and I think that way? Should we not? I don't really think James is addressing it in that way. I think he's talking about something else. And I think what will help us to see that is if we break it down by looking at the subjects in these few verses. And so what does this passage say about you and me as a subject? Well, he says this: what is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. So he talks about this idea of life being temporary and fragile. And now this idea isn't new to James. We even see this back in the Old Testament. We see this as a form of wisdom for you and I in Proverbs 27:1. Proverbs 21 says this: do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Do not boast about tomorrow. Don't say that I'm guaranteed tomorrow, because you don't know what a day may bring. And Moses says this in Psalm 90:12. He says this: teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. You see, Moses is building off of this idea that you and I are much like the grass or the flowers that grow in the morning but wither in the sun. See, you and I, we have a certain number of days. And so Moses is like, how should you and I live in such a way, knowing that we are both kind of temporary, that our life is fragile, and we only have a certain number of days to live on this planet in this sort of way. And so there should be some wisdom, or there needs to be a level of wisdom in terms of how you and I live our lives. So it's not necessarily that you and I shouldn't have plans, but where is our treasure? Where are our values? What are we living for? And James is writing about that, and you almost wonder if he gets this idea from Jesus when Jesus is talking about this in a parable, which I don't have on this TV screen, but you can check out in your own time. This is a parable found in Luke chapter 12. These are verses 13 through 21, when Jesus is talking about this rich fool. And it says, there's a certain rich man that yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I've gotten so much, I've become so successful that I don't have anywhere to stash all my crops, which again, in this context, that's like cash. Like, I have so much cash, I don't have anywhere to put it. What do I need to do? So this man says, I know what I'll do. I'm just gonna keep building bigger barns for my crops. And so he kept tearing down barns and building bigger ones so he can store all of his stuff. And Jesus says this in verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? See, you were living for all of these temporary things. This is what you valued, and you just lived for accumulating stuff on this earth. Interestingly enough, that I asked Josh, our leader who shared earlier, to just share a psalm with us. He didn't know, nor did I know, that we'd find ourselves in the same spot tonight in terms of living for this world and being successful in the world eyes. Now, don't get me wrong. Tonight I'm not saying that God doesn't want you to be successful, What I am saying is that God wants to do something with your success that's far greater or bigger than yourselves, that's far greater or bigger than the temporary circumstances we find ourselves in. Now, this rich fool could be like, wait, hold on. You didn't tell me I was going to die tomorrow. I didn't know that I was going to die tomorrow. And Jesus would simply respond to that with, yeah, you didn't know you were going to die tomorrow, but you absolutely knew that you were going to die. See, the death rate for humanity is every person dies. It's one for one. See, on a long enough timeline, our death rate is 100%. Right? I mean, that's what Moses says in Psalm 90, that, hey, what do we get? 70 to 80 years? He even writes that in the Psalm. And so Jesus would say, yeah, you didn't know when you were going to die, but you knew you were going to die, and you didn't live with the end in mind. And that's what I think that James is getting at in James chapter 4 when he says, like, what is your life? And don't boast that you're going to be able to do this and this with your life, because you simply don't know. So you need to live today in light of not knowing exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. But if you live in a certain way with the right priorities, then you're going to be living in a good way. Another way to say it is this, and I have it on the TV screen, is that your fragility should shape your priorities. Your fragility should shape your priorities. That the temporary things around you, that should not be where your heart and your treasure is. That it should be in something far greater, far more eternal than that. And so before you and I go out, we need to know what we're going to be about. And maybe that's something you can think about now in the context you find yourselves in. Maybe you're at home and you're not going out, but you're going to be going out soon. You're going to be returning to work, or you're going to be heading into that new job, or eventually when you go back to school. And maybe you and I should, before we go out, we should figure out what we're going to be about, what we are going to live for. But we also want to look at what this passage has to say about God. So James writes this: instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. And I think what James is getting at is this idea of God being sovereign, that God has a will and that he is sovereign. And we see this in 1 Timothy 6:15, where it says this: God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of kings and the Lord of lords. So when we talk about this idea of God being sovereign, we see that God is without equal. That God simply calls the shots and he has ultimate authority. He's the king and he has a kingdom. And he is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He has no limitation in any way. He is outside of time. He is infinite. He had no beginning. He has no end. And he simply is the ruler of everything. And I think at times, people might poke at Christians to try to find the meaning in crisis or the good in crisis. But I believe that time and time again that God comes through and shows that he can share goodness or bring goodness out of tough circumstances. But we also see this in Colossians 1:17, that God existed before anything else and he holds all creation together. And so at times there's going to be a crisis in our life. And at times it's not on a global scale like we find ourselves. At times it's very personal. It's just to us. And at times we feel like we're alone and we don't really see God's plan in any of it. But what the scriptures tell us is that God is working in all things for the good of people. And so when we talk about God's sovereignty, it means that there isn't anything that will enter your life that God does not either decree or allow. It's important to remember that. See, nothing catches God by surprise. If he's infinite and he's stepping out of time, there's nothing that all of a sudden causes God to hit some sort of panic button or go, oh my goodness, I didn't know that was going to happen to you. God knows all. So if it happens to you, either God allowed it or he decreed it. Either God caused it or he allowed that to happen in your life. And what I honestly believe, what I absolutely believe is nothing will enter your life that if you're willing to trust God, that he cannot work out for your own good. Let me say that again. Nothing will ever enter your life that if you are willing to trust God with, that he cannot work out for your good. One of my best friends was diagnosed with brain cancer, with a tumor. It looked bleak. It looked bleak. It was not part of his plan, but God worked it out for Ray's good. God worked it out for the good of his friends and his family. If Ray was sitting here tonight, he's home right now with his family. If Ray was sitting here tonight, he would be what I would call a story, a testimony of God's goodness in that crisis. And so God's sovereignty means that God will allow things to happen in your life and in my life that he can work out for your good, even if it's just looking dark, even if it's looking bleak. And so we see in this passage from James who we are. We're simply a mist, that we are fragile, that ourselves, our constitution, it's not forever, it's not eternal. And I think at times we forget that. At times we forget to live with the end in mind. The writers in the Old Testament knew very well where they were going. A lot of times they talked about going into the pit or Sheol. And a group of religious leaders known as the Sadducees believed that literally your life just ended, that you and I weren't eternal at all, that you would just go into the pit of Sheol, and death had its final answer over you. And so you existed for the amusement of God for a period of time, but then you were done. Like you were in the pit and you vanished. But you and I should live with the end in mind, because Jesus, right? See, here's one thing I know, it's this, and here's something I want to stick with you tonight and maybe throughout the rest of your week is that God's plan is greater than my dreams. God's plan is far greater than my dreams. And so maybe my hopes or my dreams, whatever I thought was going to happen in my life right now or this year, maybe those got canceled, maybe those got put on hold, maybe those got uprooted, maybe those just simply aren't even necessarily happening. But I know this, that God's plan is far greater than my dreams, because I know that God's plan for death and sin is far greater. Think about it. God's plan. Before the foundations of this planet, God had a plan for the sin you and I adopted, you and I took on, right? So you and I said no to God and his ways, and as a result, our sin separated you and I from a perfect and holy God. But before Adam and Eve even existed, God had a plan that was far greater than sin and death, and that was Jesus. Jesus, who went to a cross and died a death and then conquered sin and death and offers eternal life to you and to me, right? Jesus says, I went to the cross and now I hold the keys to life and death, so that death would no longer be a pit for you and for me, but would now just be simply a shadow, right? Like the psalmist says, the valley of the shadow of death. Death is now a shadow because of Jesus. That you and I pass through that valley, and on the other end of that is an eternity with the God who steps outside of time, with the God who has established a kingdom. He is the king of an eternal kingdom. This sovereign God, who is the King of kings and the Lord of lords, who is without equal, who is absolutely just. And in his presence, you and I feel absolutely complete and content, because we are with our Creator. An eternity that has no pain, no sorrow. An eternity that has no crisis. Do you understand the truth in that statement? And so God had a plan that was far greater than sin and death. And we see that in Jesus. So I know because of that his plan for your life specifically is far greater than any of your dreams. Now, I understand at times that leads to disappointment, or maybe even some of you might feel disenchanted. But I would always encourage you to bring that disappointment, to bring your disenchantment to God. That's simply what the psalmists do. That's what the psalmist did in the psalm that Josh read tonight, is he brought that disappointment, he brought that disenchantment, he brought it to God. That's what I encourage you to do, because if you would be willing to trust God in that, I believe that God will work it out for good. He'll work it out for your good. He'll work it out for the good of others. But maybe you stumbled upon us tonight and you're just watching something, just killing time, just hanging out in quarantine life, and you don't have hope in Jesus. Now, we believe here at Vintage that Jesus is very real, and that Jesus is who he says he is, that he's the Son of God. He's God who stepped into humanity, that he is perfect, blameless, and sinless, and that he went to a cross for you and for me and died on our behalf. And that if you and I would just simply do a few things, that we would believe who he is, and that we would receive what he's done for us. That's what John 1:12, all who believe and all who receive, he gave the right to become children of God. And so that's what we have done here at Vintage. We have placed our faith and our trust. We've believed Jesus is who he says he is. We've received what he's done for us. And so if you're watching tonight and you find yourself in a spot where you are not living a life with Jesus, I would encourage you, go to thechapel.com/knowingjesus. There you will learn what it means to have a relationship with Jesus, to invite Jesus into your life, to no longer do life on your own, so that when crisis hits, you're not alone. Instead, you have Christ. So you're dealing with crisis with Christ. So I will encourage you to do that, or just reach out to us. You can DM us. You can reach out to us in any way, email, hop on our website. We're available. We are here, and we would love to hear from you if you need help in that. But maybe you're sitting here tonight, and maybe you got some news recently and your plans have been changed and they've been uprooted. This is what I would encourage you to do. I would encourage you to put your trust in God and his sovereignty, knowing that he's allowing this to happen in your life because his plan is far greater than your dreams. And so maybe you're sitting there and right now you're unsure what the job market's gonna look like in a few months. Maybe you're sitting there and you're unsure what your school program's gonna look like as a result of this semester. Maybe you're uncertain with some of your relationships. Maybe you're uncertain with the health of some of your family members. I don't wanna minimize any of that, but what I wanna encourage you to do is to bring it to the sovereign God, to trust him and his sovereignty, knowing that he knows what is happening, that he's allowing it, and that he is gonna work it out for good if you would simply trust him in it and continue to bring it to him. And you might not see his goodness right now. You might not see his goodness in the near future, in these next few weeks, but I'm telling you, you will see it, because I believe God works all things together for the good of those who love him, who he's called for his purpose. So I'm hoping that encouraged you tonight. But let's take a few moments. Let's think on that. Let's allow that to settle in our hearts and our souls. And let's have a song of worship where we can respond. So Chloe, would you please lead us in a song tonight?
Every battle, through every heartbreak, through every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress, you are my portion, you are my hiding place. protector. You are the one I love. Oh, I believe that you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe that you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe that you are. It's a new horizon. It's a new horizon. And I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that I knew. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I'm here with you. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that I knew. Oh yeah, all my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I believe that you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe that you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe that you are. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that I knew. Oh yeah, all my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I believe that you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe that you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe that you are.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us at Virtual Vintage. It's been such a good night, and I hope you've been encouraged and inspired to continue to live for Jesus. Before you go, a couple things that we want to share with you tonight. So.
Yeah, we want to remind you that next week looks different. It'll be Vintage at Jay's Place next Tuesday, so tune into our Instagram to watch that. And then again, Wednesday, May 6th, is our night of encouragement. So we would love for you to join us there. We subscribe to our YouTube and reach out to us via Instagram if you have any questions at vintage_truth. And after this broadcast, some numbers will come up. If you text that number, you'll get community group questions. And we would just love to see you next week.